As the Allies advanced during the Second World War throughout Normandy, many came across horrific scenes in which the French people were punishing their own. Especially harrowing was the treatment of women who were accused of horizontal collaboration or sleeping with the Nazis or the German enemy. Because of this, brutal acts of violence, killing and shaming took place in many French towns, and because of this it became known as the Ugly Carnival. Women were forced to run the gauntlet and experience terrifying treatment, including having their hair roughly shaven, and many were beaten. In some particular cases, women were even killed at the hands of the men in the crowds, and it's estimated that thousands of women were subject to this ordeal. Some were even covered in tar and were painted with swastikas. But what is the story of this? Join us today as we look at the horrific torture of the women of the Ugly Carnival, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. In every country which was occupied by different armies throughout the Second World War, there was an element of collaboration. Many women inside of these lands may have simply fallen in love with their occupiers, and many saw the soldiers as charming and exotic. In Britain, there were many women who later married former German and Italian prisoners of war, following their internment inside prisoner of war camps in England. But in France, fraternisation with the enemy, especially as the war turned against the enemy, was harshly and strictly punished. In France there were around 200,000 babies born to French mothers and German fathers, and wherever the German army went this happened. For example, in Norway, 12,000 were born, and on the Channel Islands, the only part of Britain that Hitler managed to invade, around 900 German fathered children were registered and were born there. It was just a matter of what happened during the Second World War. There was also an element of assault in this, as many of the women were assaulted by occupied forces. Famously, this happened as the Soviets advanced towards Berlin and Germany, giving rise to the notoriety and brutality of the Red Army. But as many Germans advanced and captured large elements of France, the occupying forces made themselves comfortable, and many of them started to date the local women. As mentioned, many of these women embarked on relationships with the enemy, and German soldiers had many French girlfriends. Some saw the French ladies as exotic, and had them pose for images in their German uniforms, and a number of German soldiers believed Paris in particular was filled with women who would sleep with them. They referred to it as a giant cat house, and they would then head into Paris and go to the brothels in the city. But some women believed that the German men could give them a happy and great future, and that they could start a family together. After the war, many couples who had met did live happily, and many French women did leave France to go and live in Germany with their new German husbands. Many German soldiers after the war were imprisoned in camps also, and their French wives often went with them. But sleeping with the enemy and the idea of horizontal collaboration was seen in France as one of the most shameful things that a woman could do. Following the D-Day invasion and the advance from Normandy, the Allied forces liberated many French towns and settlements. Many people were jubilant that they had been liberated and freed, but quickly a sense of retribution against the enemy, and in particular local women, developed. The Ugly Carnival, as it was known, was public humiliation aimed to inflict pain psychologically and physically onto the women who had slept with the German enemy. Many of the advancing Allied soldiers who saw this were very shocked and were disgusted by what they saw, but they then understood the hatred that many members of the French population had towards the Germans. To subject their own people to such a horrific ordeal, the French must have truly hated living under German and Nazi occupation, but the women of the Ugly Carnival were subject to pure horror. In front of the large crowds, women who were accused of sleeping with the Germans were brought into public squares and outside town halls, where thousands of people could see them. They were then subject often to having their heads shaved, a punishment linked for centuries to humiliating women. Many of these had their hair hacked by men and members of the resistance, and this was a very painful and horrific scene. The women were often seen to be in floods of tears from this, but some remained staunch and defiant in their appearance, not wanting to give the crowd what they wanted. Many of the crowd were baying for their blood, and following the head shaving, women were often forced to run throughout the crowd. Here they were hit and beaten by other members of the crowd. Some of the women were stripped half naked and were forced to walk throughout the French towns, where the crowds would spit at them, violently inflict pain onto them, and some were beaten so badly that they actually died. Many of the women were at least bloodied by the attacks, and many also had swastikas drawn on their foreheads, or on their bodies in paint and lipstick, showing without no question what these women had done. The women were also forced to stand on carts and trucks where they were then driven around the towns and settlements. They then had things thrown at them. It was a very dangerous scene, and of the women it was said that, in the hands of their tormentors, they had the look of a hunted animal. Many Allied soldiers wrote of what they saw and said, the French were rounding up collaborators, cutting their hair off and burning it in huge piles, which one could smell miles away. Women collaborators were forced to run the gauntlet and were really beaten. Some men were also accused of helping the Germans, and they were also subject to the Ugly Carnival, and many collaborators who had given over Jews and members of the French resistance were even hanged in public to send a clear message of hatred. In mid-June, following the capture of Carentan, a dozen women were shaved publicly in the town square. Also on the 14th of July, in Cherbourg, a truckload of young women, many who were just teenagers, were paraded throughout the streets and were subject to the Ugly Carnival. In one French town, one woman who became a victim had not slept with the enemy, but she had just worked as a cleaner in the local German army headquarters. Another woman who was forced to allow Germans to live in her house, a schoolteacher, was falsely slandered and humiliated. A number of victims were also prostitutes, who had not bothered about the nationality of the soldiers who paid them, and in Paris it was known that a number were killed by the crowd for their horizontal collaboration. But a large number of women who were subject to the Ugly Carnival had slept with the enemy, and a number of them had been forced to sleep with the Germans to secure financial help, food and help for their children. Many believed that the only way they would get food and not starve was to sleep with German officers, who would then give them more lenient and better treatment, and many did look down on them for this. One eyewitness who saw the events of the bloody Ugly Carnival said, "I saw 4 girls who had been led through the streets, and I rushed towards them to take a photograph. At once I found myself at the front of the procession, and the local people thought I was a female soldier who had captured them, or something like that, and I was kissed and congratulated at the same time, as slaps and spits rained down on the unfortunate girls." Another witness stated that, "I watched an open lorry drive past, to the accompaniment of boos and catcalls from the French population, with a dozen miserable women on the back, every hair on their heads shaved off. They were in tears, hanging their heads in shame. Whilst disgusted by this cruelty, I reflected that we British had not known invasion or occupation for some 900 years, so we were not the best judges." It is estimated that at least 20,000 French women were forced to run the Ugly Carnival, and had their heads shaved. The images of the women covered in swastikas is very shocking, and sent a clear message to everyone who was witnessing what was happening. Some people inside of France, and some inside of the resistance, hated the act of head shaving. For example, Colonel Henry Roll Tanguy printed a number of posters that said there would be reprisals made against anyone who shaved the heads of the women in this scene. One other resistance leader knocked the heads together of 2 young boys who were tormenting a young woman for her ordeal. A famous image and photograph titled "The Shaved Woman of Chartres," which was taken by Robert Capa on the 16th of August 1944, shows a true horror of the Ugly Carnival. The picture shows a 23-year-old woman, Simone Torgesu, who has been a translator for the Germans, carrying her baby. She had been in a relationship with a German soldier since 1941, and the couple had a daughter, and this baby was brought also throughout the Ugly Carnival. She was accused of denouncing neighbours who were then deported to concentration camps, but she did deny this. She was forced to carry her daughter in her arms after she had her head shaved, and her forehead had been marked in red with an iron. She was paraded throughout the streets of Chartres, followed by many people, including women, policemen and children. Her father walked ahead carrying her bag, and her mother also suffered the same punishment, and she was being escorted home and was then sent to jail after. The Ugly Carnival was a horrific scene of public humiliation, in which 20,000 women were accused of sleeping with the enemy. The French saw this as hugely insulting, especially as many of the women received more food and money than the French people were getting, who were suffering at the time during occupation. It was a harrowing sight, seeing women with their heads shaved crying as swastikas were painted on them, and crowds were trying to beat them. Many of these women were forced out of their homes, and many were actually victims of the Germans who had been assaulted, and many were falsely accused of sleeping with the enemy. It is a dark period of the liberation of France, and left a mark on the men who helped to liberate the country, which had suffered greatly. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.